Good morning, everybody. My name is Clyde Ralston. I am a professor at the Curb College of Entertainment and Music Business at Belmont University. Thanks for getting up early, especially those of you on the left coast. And special thanks to Alex, the man behind the curtain that you folks never get to see, for doing all the technical work. And he's one of those left coast people. So it's good to see that his eyes are wide open this morning. So he's working very hard behind the scenes. So you are here this morning, presumably because you are in a tenure track position or want to be in a tenure track position, and you want to learn a little bit about that process. So we hopefully have put together a good session for you, and we have some distinguished panelists. We have Beverly Schneller, who is currently the provost at Governor State University, former colleague of mine at Belmont, and has served at several different institutions. We also have Terry Tompkins, who most of you know well, me a board member, and he's currently at Hofstra. And then Bruce Ronkin, who is the editor of the MEIEA Journal and the provost in charge of vices at Northeastern, so the vice provost. So I'd like to start out by consulting our administrator types. We'll start with Beverly and get a perspective from the C-suite, so to speak, on what exactly administration is looking for when somebody's application for tenure or promotion comes across their desk. So, Beverly, can you speak to us on those issues?
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Clyde. Happy to be here with Bruce and Terry to talk about this subject this morning. I have worked in public institutions that have union contracts, public institutions that don't have union contracts, and private institutions that don't have union contracts. So there is a difference when you're applying in a unionized system versus a non-unionized system. So if you're in a unionized system, usually your collective bargaining agreement will lay out very nicely for you what you're supposed to have in your portfolio packages. And so one of the basic things that you want to be sure that you do from the ground up is either create or follow the checklist that may be in your faculty handbook that will provide you the guidance just to make sure that everything that should be in the application is in the application. So that's one of the first things that we look for. Usually there's a sheet that comes on the top, or in a workflow if you're doing it electronically through Interfolio or digital measures or some other guide. It will show you what the chain of reading has been. And so when it gets to the provost's office, there's a couple of things that can have happened before it gets to me. In some instances, and I perform this function, in some instances, the provost will ask the vice provost for academic affairs to do a review of the applications and provide summary notes or some kind of thoughts just to make sure that everything has been collected. Other times the provost, which is what I tend to do, is just take the applications myself and read them completely. You should expect that the provost will read your application. And so the first thing I'm going to suggest to you in terms of making a successful application is write for the farthest reach audience to connect. The person who makes the decision, or the group that makes the decision about promotion and tenure, is a combination of the provost, the president, and then the board of trustees. Most faculty members, and they don't have any reason to, but most faculty members don't spend a lot of time reading about or understanding who the board of trustees is. But your target audience is really the provost, the president, and the board in your application.
Beverly,
yes,
in your experience, how involved is the board of trustees normally. It seems in most cases they just kind of rubber stamp the provost and the president's recommendations.
Not always. The boards vary. There are boards that are very active. There are boards that are a little bit more like that. It's like, well, you're bringing it to us and everybody else is checked off, so they'll take a look. It really depends. And that's part of the reason for taking some time to get to know your board. You can know your board by reading board minutes. Our board meetings are actually taped and shown on YouTube as a public institution. So if there's a way that you can access or attend a board meeting 9 months or so prior to the time you do your applications, it's a very good idea to think about that. As music industry educators and artists yourselves, you know the importance of the elevator pitch. And so basically you want to develop your application around an elevator pitch, 2, 3, 4 points at the most for maybe teaching, scholarship, and service. That's going to make me remember you, right? You want to be memorable for a good reason always. So, things that are directly connected to the mission, to the vision, to the values, to the strategic plan, and any other things that the institution might be working towards as part of their brand identity and reputation. If you can develop your elevator pitch, then you have developed a brand identity for yourself that will be recognizable to the institution. One of the specific challenges in working in an institution like Belmont and others that have actual artists who are on the faculty is bridging that gap between academic expectations and industry standards, right? And so the second point I want to make is contextualize what you do, right? And put it in a positive frame. You don't need to think I need to make excuses for, or I need to justify, or I need to be, desperately trying to show that I am an academic. You're there because you have, especially if you're in an AACSB accredited program like the Belmont program, you have to meet the standards in the music business side for business and for music industry. And so, you want to be sure that you're making that connection between what the expectations are for an academic faculty member and what your industry standards are by contextualizing. When I lead workshops on preparing the application, I tell people 3 C's: contextualize, connect, and communicate. No one can read between the lines and guess what you mean, right? You shouldn't rely on anyone to infer anything about you. You have to start with a clean slate, just like you're walking in with your portfolio on the first day with a pitch trying to get noticed by an artist manager. So it's important that you contextualize those things. The last thing I'll say is if you're not using the Boyer model, Ernest Boyer's model from Scholarship Reconsidered or the update from the 90s, you really should take a close look at the Boyer model, because the Boyer model is very flexible. It's Boyer, Ernest Boyer, Scholarship Reconsidered. And the Boyer model allows you to incorporate things that can be very helpful for what we might call differently qualified faculty members, like songwriters, for example, that will allow you to say, for example, when you write your syllabus in the Scholarship of Discovery under the Boyer model, you can include all the updates that you have to your syllabus. Say, for example, you take students to an art gallery, you have them read poetry, they do other things that are more conventionally academic in that sense. You can frame that to show where you're intersecting with the other coursework and the other pieces of the curriculum within your unit. So using the Boyer model gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you go back carefully through your career and look at all the things that you've done that meet that mark for teaching, scholarship, and service. So I'll stop here, and then I think we're going to have some question and answer a little bit later on so people can circle back unless you want to ask something else, Clyde, before I stop.
Well, I would like to kind of zero in on one of the terms you used, and that was branding. And Terry and Bruce, feel free to jump into this conversation at any point. Is it really important to brand yourself and occupy a unique space amongst your faculty? And does that really help you in making your case for tenure and promotion?
I think so, because I can give you an example from a recent cycle that I was involved with. One of the things that we ask faculty members to do here is actually do a reflective essay in their own self-study and talk about their cycle for continuous improvement. And so even though the faculty member wouldn't necessarily say that they had created a brand, when I read the application, I could see that their brand identity was learning from their student evaluations and making really solid documented improvements to their teaching. And so I think if you can brand yourself in that sense as someone who is very focused on, I guess the question is, what does academic branding look like? So it's focused on student success. It's focused on student initiatives. It's responsive to the needs of the institution and the community, and it would feature high quality performance metrics, publications, creative works, engagement with the community, things like that. So yeah, it does really help you. And it's not something that you necessarily going to redecorate your office around. It's a theme that allows you to focus your narrative in a way that's memorable. So when I actually met the person whose application I read at a reception last week, I was like, I know who you are, because when I read your application, it stood out to me because you had all these great things you had done with closing the loop on student success. And so that person now is in my memory bank for other duties as assigned. When I want somebody who's going to work for student success, I'm going to reach out to that person first. So that's the risk you take, right? If you do well, you get extra work, right? So
yeah. Well, and I think from my experience in our process at Belmont, one of the things I think our viewers need to understand is that they're not necessarily looking for perfection. They're looking for effort and improvement, and people responding to the comments of the students or the review from the dean. At Belmont, every faculty member is supposed to get a 1, 3, and 5 year review from their dean. And often, it varies from dean to dean. They don't all do it. They don't all do it well. But in some cases, the dean is giving them written feedback, and the committee is aware of this and looks at how the applicant responded to the feedback, what changes they may have made to address those issues. Everybody can't be a superstar. Somebody's got to be below average, But if you're checking off the boxes and you're making an effort and you're doing a good job, that is usually sufficient. So on the other side of the coin here, we have Terry Tompkins, who is currently in the process of applying for both tenure and promotion. Is that correct, Terry?
It's tenure right now.
Just tenure. Okay. So give us the perspective of the faculty member.
I guess it's tenure and promotion, right? It's so confusing, right? So tenure, and then I would move from assistant to associate professor. So I guess that's the promotion part. Yeah. By the way, Beverly, that was awesome. I was taking notes. I wish I heard you tell me this stuff a year ago. I'm currently putting my portfolio together this summer, and submitting it in August for review for next year. So I've been thinking a lot about this stuff. I think your point about branding, by the way, is a really interesting one. And I kind of have a different take on it in that, we're expected to be experts in our industry, right? And so with that is a brand identity. And for me, I grew up loving sports, and with sports came data analytics, and I found a way to incorporate data analytics into my research. So, my brand identity as a researcher is data analytics. And I never thought that I was going to become a professor, although my mom was a teacher, so I knew it was in the blood. And I didn't really have an understanding of sort of what my branding would be as a teacher, as an educator. And what I've learned is experiential learning is the way that I approach teaching. So learning by doing. And so I apply that in the classroom and outside the classroom. So I guess from a teaching perspective, that's my brand identity. And I guess from a service perspective, I was told early on to be collegial. I had no idea really what that meant, but I guess you want to be well liked, and you want to cooperate with others, and so I do. Yes, Beverly, I raise my hand, and because I raise my hand all the time, I take on more things. One of the things I just taken on, I spent half the day yesterday working on the renovation of our recording studio. I don't have a recording degree. I've done A&R. I've never worked in a studio, but I raised my hand and I put in for a fund to renovate our recording studios. And now I'm in charge of hiring people and making this happen. So I guess being collegial is raising your hand and working well with others. So I guess, I didn't even answer your question yet, Clyde, but that's sort of my brand identity answer. What was your question, by the way?
What's your perspective as the applicant going through this process? What your feelings, the information that you're getting or lacking, and maybe just tell us a little bit about how Hofstra does it as compared to, we can all share our experiences as well.
Absolutely. I think anyone who's going through tenure over the last 2 years has to put an asterisk next to their name. As we're dealing with COVID and our inability to make presentations and travel, and with that comes funding for scholarly work. So I don't want to get into a long, drawn out COVID discussion about tenure, but it's certainly a consideration for me over the last 2 years. I guess going into it, what is teaching, what is service, and what is considered scholarly work would be the first questions that I would ask. And I'm at a private institution, although we are a union, so it's a little bit confusing that we're a strong unionized school, but we are a private institution, so we have our own guidelines. And I'm the only faculty member that is full-time in music business. And we've gone from an enrollment of 20 to 100 in 4 years, and so that's going to be growing. And I'm filling the void with many adjuncts. So I am also Bugs Bunny on first base and second base and handling a lot of things. And so I'm sort of an anomaly, right? I'm in a program which is in a music department. And, I've done research and Clyde, I think you may be Belmont may be the only school that runs under the, what is it? The AA, what was that, Beverly?
AA. Yeah, AACSB.
ACSB. So, we're looking at NASM, as requirements for music, which I know Bruce can probably talk a little bit about. And I'm being compared against composers and conductors, right? And I don't do any of that work. I wanted to be a rock star, and, I played in bands and I play an instrument, but that's not my professional work. I'm a manager and an A&R rep. And so then, you ask the question as far as like scholarly work, is it dependent upon the success of my artists? To get great press, if they sell lots of records, if they get songs placed into film and TV shows? Well, what if I do the same amount of work and it doesn't happen? Does that count? And how does that count? So that was always sort of a question for me, the professional work. As far as the scholarly work, and thank God for Bruce, we have essentially 2 journals in our industry. If I'm in the business school, which is the Zarb School of Business, and I'm a marketing professor at Hofstra, I've got dozens, maybe hundreds of journals to consider publishing. We have 2. We have MEIEA, which is amazing, and Bruce does a great job, and it's an international music business journal. You can think outside the box, and you can go into pedagogy and other areas of interest, but if you're not one of the 4 to 6 individuals that get published in the MEIEA journal, you're sweating it. And at our institution, I asked the question, how many publications do I need? Well, just do a great job. There wasn't a requirement on X amount of, journal publications that I needed to see. And that's different than, say, the business school. They have very strict guidelines for the type of publications. And yes, they want to see peer reviewed. They want to see us published, but I didn't have a quantified number going into it. So, the research is challenging. And, luckily I've got 3 publications and a 4th that's imminent. So hopefully that's enough. But I don't know, Clyde, is it enough?
Well, it certainly is at Belmont. And, because we are a business program in an otherwise entertainment school, we've been under the AACSB and business school expectations, which are actually greater than the university's expectations. Right. So that's been a challenge. The other thing is we're a business program with artists teaching in the program. And so we've had to deal with the issue of, well, does a hit song count? How many records do you have to sell for it to be a top tier, publication? And they wanted us to quantify that. And we spent a year, and it comes up again periodically. We're not going to stick a number on this because, okay, you sell 1 million, then that's a top tier. What if you sell 999,999? Is that not as good? And now with streaming and all that sort of stuff. So ultimately, what we ended up doing is we left it to the applicant to make a case for their artistic work. Right. So I think you're kind of in just the opposite situation where you'll need to build a case for why this journal publication is relevant. And I don't want to go ahead, Beverly.
Let me put a couple of footnotes on what Terry said from my perspective, because you brought up a couple of very good examples. With the MEIEA journal and your other industry journal, that's one of the things that in conventional academic review, if somebody, I've seen it happen to people mostly at the departmental level, where the departmental committee will ding somebody or they'll critique them in the 135 review for, well, you're just publishing in the same journal, right? And so if there are only 2 journals that are academically appropriate for your publications, then that's my point about contextualizing, right? And so you say, here's the MEIEA journal, it's peer reviewed, it has this many subscriptions. Do you know about Ulrich's guide for ranking? Okay, so there's a professional ranking service for journal quality. It's mostly used in the sciences, but it's the Ulrich's Guide to Periodicals, ULRICH. And Ulrich Ulrich is a benchmark for measuring circulation of journals and peer review and how it compares to other things. So even just looking at that, or doing Google Scholar citations for your publications gives you the same sort of yield. But when you only have 2 journals, you have to talk about both of those in your application. And you have to say, here's the one, here's the other one. And then I'm publishing mainly in the MEIEA journal because I'm a music industry educator and it's peer reviewed. It has this many people. And then you use Bruce's credentials, you use the submission guidelines, you make those things all available because but outside the industry, nobody really knows what the MEIEA journal is, right? And you shouldn't expect anyone to. So that's a great point about contextualizing, because you're going to go back to that same journal because that's the journal where your audience is and that's where you have the most impact. But like Clyde said, if I'm not a music industry provost, then I don't know that, right? And you can't take that for granted. The other thing you said that was also important was when you're talking about taking on the other duties as assigned, writing a grant and fixing the studio. That's a perfect place to contextualize in the Boyer model. You have knowledge, skills, and dispositions that make you qualified, whether you have an audio engineering degree or not, to be able to do that work. So what someone in a similar situation to yours would want to do, and it works the same for grants, whether you get it or not, it doesn't matter. It's better if you get it, but if you don't get it, the argument's still the same, because you made the application or you took on the extra work, and then you line out, because I am a recording artist, because I buy equipment for studios, whatever it is, and then match that back to what are the expectations for that history professor, and how do they demonstrate content, knowledge, expertise, because you can go point for point with that. And Clyde, I'm not going to completely disagree with you, but I'm going to put an alternative perspective on the metrics and the data analysis about how many records you sold. People can find that information. So if you're on the Billboard chart, you obviously want to mention that, but you want to explain what Billboard is. If you're in Variety, same kind of thing. You need to provide the context for that. But the bigger context is, what does it mean to have a record that gets, or a song that gets onto one of these charts? And so there's two things there. First of all, you got onto a worldwide or global ranking list. And secondly, where you placed, right? And I think Terry could probably speak to this. There are metrics you can use for things like that you can determine whether it strengthens or doesn't strengthen your case. And if it's not super strong, you can still acknowledge it's out there, because due diligence, I'll find it. I go looking for things, if I'm interested in something.
Part of that issue for us was there were basically two tiers in terms of publication, and we were trying to justify being a song being in the top tier in the sense that it was peer reviewed. And, in the old system, where you had to be discovered by a record label and then accepted on radio, you really did have a more obvious peer review than if you upload your song on Spotify and it gets 100,000 streams. And there's no, it's popular, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good, whatever that means, and by whose standards. So that's what we were dealing with. So I really want to bring
the difference between accreditation standards and what your faculty handbook says or your union contract says. And that's an area where I would encourage all of the artists who have crossed over into higher education or are balancing both to really work with the faculty senate and work with your union leadership if you have a union contract, to make sure that the kind of work that you do that's representative of your expertise is reflected and is well described in the faculty handbook. Most of us have appendices in the back that say, for the College of Business, they do this, for the history department, they do that, for the music business program, they do this. And creative works is an area where a lot of people struggle on promotion tenure committees to even understand what the nature of the work is. And so if you have not done this at your institution, get a group of like-minded people together, go to the Senate, go to your handbook committee, and make sure that you have, if you're Eric Whitaker and you write a sonata that wins the MacArthur Prize, make sure that winning the MacArthur Prize is clearly listed among creative works. And how do you rate that? And again, that's where the Boyer model comes in. When you present those things, you delineate what is the critical thinking that goes into or behind that creative work.
Okay. I'd like to get Bruce in on this conversation. Bruce has been the editor of the journal since the beginning of time, I think, certainly since beginning of my time at MEIEA, which goes back a ways, and has really brought the journal up, I think, in quality and prestige. And Bruce, I'd love for you to address that, because I know it's getting harder and harder to get accepted into the journal. And that seems like a bad thing if you get rejected. But talk to us about the upside of the improvement in quality of the journal.
Sure. And thanks for inviting me to be part of this, Clyde. I appreciate it. I've really enjoyed listening to what everybody has been contributing. And well, you're right. As the MEIEA journal has developed over the years and increased in status, it does get more difficult to get published in the journal. And that's why MEIEA has worked to provide other opportunities for our members also. And I'll go into that in a second. What I like to tell people when they're coming up for tenure and promotion is that the whole point of the process is that your institution wants to know that you are a valuable and contributing member of the institution, that you're consistent in what you do, that you do good work, and that you're going, and that the evidence shows us that you're going to continue to be productive and a good colleague and a leader in your field for a long time. That's really the case. We want to know whether we should invest in you. And one of the ways we do that is we see what are you doing within your field? And publication is a big part of it. And this is the MEIEA journal for all you members listening. If you go to the MEIEA website and click on the journal tab, you'll see it and you can learn all about it. Roughly these days, about a quarter of the submissions will get published in the MEIEA journal. It depends on the year. What I always tell people is it's more than just publishing. We're in a field where also doing live presentations at conferences is really big. And there are other fields at universities where that's important too, in computer science, in economics, that's part of it. And so, I'll talk about journals first, but then try to widen it out a bit. Terry also mentioned the International Music Business. I'm trying to remember the exact title of it, the International Music Business Research Journal, another good journal directly in our field. As you're thinking about where to publish, though, also think about what you do and how it relates to other areas. And remember, the Audio Engineering Society has a very successful journal. College Music Society does, which is also really useful. There are several really good arts administration journals out there. There's Computer Music Journal. And then depending on the kind of research you do, there are many journals in communication studies, cultural studies, marketing, management, entrepreneurship, supply chain and finance. And these days, creativity and leadership have their own journals also. And so much of the work that we do is related to that also. So I encourage you to look into that. And then when Beverly talked about contextualizing the work, that's really key. Don't get too upset if you look at, the journal Nature and someone has 1,800 citations in the last year. The size of their readership, the size of their membership is huge compared to MEIEA. You need to let people know that the number of tenure track or full-time faculty that are members of MEIEA, and that, we're talking 100, 200, maybe 200 members. I forget. Terry, you probably know better than me. 200 or 300 members and maybe 70 to 100 active members. So when one of our articles gets 19 citations, that's substantial. And if you contextualize that for the groups that look at the work, it's important. I'll just mention one other thing, Clyde, and then I'll hand it back to you because I'm sure you know where you want to steer this. In my experience, at least at my university and for many of the external reviews that I've written, the department and the college level reviews and the external reviews can be really key because that's what helps the provost, the president, to make a good decision. They're not going to be disciplinary experts in most cases. And so if you can have your chair and your dean be your real advocate to help underscore that academic brand that you've built, to help underscore what the external reviewers say about how important it is, and that you've gone through those steps of explaining why working with an artist and developing a career as an artist manager is collaborative art, much in the way that theater is collaborative art. And you have someone who's writing a script, and someone who's doing lighting, and someone who's doing directing, and it all comes together to make art. That's what a manager does. And if you have those subject experts make that clear in whatever kind of work we do in music business, that helps solidify the case. It shows how important you are to the institution.
Can I ask a question and make a quick comment? So I sat through a workshop last week with the dean's office with tenure candidates, and I learned after 5 years that there is no requirement for an external review committee at our institution, and it's up to the department chair to make that decision. I had no idea. That was a surprise to me. I'm wondering if that's common, not common. Anybody have any perspective on that? Bruce, you were just talking about external, so I was curious.
Yeah. In my experience, it varies a lot. Many institutions these days require external reviews. They require a specific number. They even allow for the candidate to submit a list of names from which some will be selected, and they require the department to choose names that you, the candidate, know nothing about, and they require that they be arm's length reviewers. But then other schools just make it really informal, and wherever you are, that's the game you have to play, and you have to play by those rules.
Yeah, we don't require that. But one thing I will say that it can be advantageous to you if you're in a fairly specialized area to have someone do an external review of your teaching or your scholarship in the form of a letter of support, teaching scholarship or service. My own field is a very specialized area in literary entrepreneurship. And so when I was going up for promotion and tenure, I had letters from people who did similar work to mine, who, the purpose was to help the committee understand why the work I did was important, because at the time, there were no benchmarks to compare it to. And so, then that can be really useful in those areas. But check your union contracts and check your faculty handbook to see, because sometimes the union will have a clause in there for the external review that's been in the collective bargaining, and other times it doesn't.
Yeah, Belmont does not require an external review, but it does require letters from, or strongly recommend letters from your fellow faculty, your chair, and of course your dean has to support your application going up. So I think one of the things that we haven't touched on is the nuts and bolts of this, the importance of being published, and it's kind of scary. You also want to look at how your school treats those publications in terms of credits. At Belmont, to go from assistant to associate, you have to have 2 publications. Belmont does not penalize you for co-authoring. Other schools will. When I was in grad school at Temple, they divided the credit by the number of authors. So if you had 4 authors, and it didn't matter if you hit a top tier journal, you still only got a quarter of a credit, and you had to do more publications to meet their requirements. So you're going to need to pay attention to those nuances in the rules. And the other thing I would tell you, if you're new to academia, is this is not a process that you start the summer before you apply, Terry. So you have to be doing this from the very beginning. Those annual reviews, I've always kept a folder in my file cabinet for every year, and every publication, every committee, anything I've done that might help build my case for promotion and tenure. I drop, a copy of an email, a letter, a copy of the publication, and I'm tracking that stuff all along. We also have some online software that the deans use for accreditation purposes that help you do that. So in short, you got to keep your resume up to date, and do the university service, do the college service, do industry service. I mean, one of the reasons why you should run for the MEIEA board is because that's the kind of thing that they look at, especially as you move up in rank. Your expectations change when you go from assistant to associate and associate to full. And at this stage, as a full professor, it's not as much about churning out a couple of articles every year. Serving our industry, our colleagues, is equally as important, which is one of the reasons why I got on the tenure and promotion committee in my college. That was a way to give back that keeps me in the good graces of administration. So.
Yeah, Clyde, I'll pick up a couple of notes from what you were talking about there. Another area that's kind of that is a local decision often is how you handle transferring experience from prior institutions to your current one in your application. Some faculty handbooks or contracts require that you have to have taught a certain number of consecutive semesters or been a certain number of years at an institution. And I've seen that there's a matter of taste sometimes, or preferences in what the departmental committee or the chair might tell a candidate about how to account for work that they did at another institution. So when you're going from associate to full, the associate to full move is really your entire career, right? So everything is open for discussion. When you're moving from assistant to associate, and this is not hard and fast, but it often works, is to present all the things that you've done at your current institution first, and then provide some highlights from your prior institution or institutions that follow that narrative line. So like in Terry's case, if it's data analytics, you probably didn't start that 3 years ago at Hofstra. So you have a history in that area. So go back and show that as a professional development strain or a line of development. But that's something that in the preparation of the application, it's really important to just ask point blank the current chair, the prior chair of the institutional committee, how do we handle prior employment, and see what they tell you about that.
That's how I was advised, by the way. Beverly, that's exactly how I was advised, how you just structured prior experience. Yeah.
Because you can't, if you get bad advice from somebody and you don't put that sort of thing in your application, you can't come back later and say, well, I didn't know what to do, so I just did this. That's not going to work. Going to Clyde's point about getting involved with things, just like publishing, like in the 6 months prior, I call it the run up to the application. If in the 4th year of your 5th year, you have half a dozen committees, you've been all over the county giving talks, and you've got all these publications, and it was like a desert before that, we can see that you suddenly, the light went off, and it's like, oh, I'm up for tenure this year, I got to do all these things. So just remember, no excuses in the applications, because the other thing I've seen is, going back to what Bruce said about the journals, I've seen people who say, well, the only journals that I feel like I should publish in are these, XYZ journals, and I've tried to get in, and I don't get published. You cannot do that. There are thousands of journals in business alone, national, international, that will be more than happy to take articles on the music industry and the music business. Because when you do Google Scholar searches for topics in the music industry, you don't find a whole lot spread across a lot of business and entrepreneurship journals. So there's a lot of opportunity just to take the step and send it in, right? But you will not end up with credit on the table at the end of the day for having submitted a bunch of stuff that was never accepted. That's not going to work.
I'd like to recommend to all the people listening that you make use of MEIEA and its resources and its members. Get to know the people, because they can help you in many ways to develop this consistent sense of doing your research and getting it out there. When I did this, it was really valuable to me to know MEIEA members. They brought me to their institutions to do guest lectures. They involved me in some of their projects. If you can publish a paper a year and appear live at a few events every year that are slightly different from your paper to show that you're growing and moving along, that's really important. That last thing I'd recommend is take a look at some dossiers, promotion dossiers at your own institution that have been successful, even if they're not directly in your field. If it's someone that's in some kind of creative field, it can be helpful for you to see, what works at your institution.
Yeah, Terry and I met because he reached out to me years ago and said, "I'm thinking about writing a paper on this. Would you, like to co-author with me?" And I think that it's a great opportunity to lighten the load, bring in somebody who has expertise that you don't have, and get those publications. And Terry's a quant guy, and I'm not. I'm qualitative, and so I think our strengths complemented each other, and we have 2 publications out, Terry. So, and of course, he's gone on to become a superstar in publishing. So, we only have a couple of minutes left. I don't know if there's any questions from
Actually, a question for something Beverly mentioned earlier that I'm thinking about. By the way, yes, Bruce, that's a good point. And one of our fellow board members and I have a publication coming out in an ethnomusicology. I never even thought about that. It's completely outside the box. And, he brought it to me, and we brought a third person on, and we literally banged it out in like a month, and it's coming out in the fall. So yes, thinking outside the box and the collaboration with our membership can really provide opportunities. My question was external letters. Beverly mentioned it, and I've been working with Digital Measures, which has provided me with a framework, and then I get this Blackboard posting, which had other things that I wasn't even thinking about that weren't part of Digital Measures, which includes external letters. So yes, we want letters of support from my colleagues, from fellow faculty. How do we approach external letters? How many letters? Who is the most qualified person to be considering amongst my peers? Any recommendations on that?
I would say that it would be people in your network that you have connections with, like in your case, maybe a letter from Clyde that explains just what he said. And then if there are people who you find yourself working with or around a lot, just getting letters of support from them directly related to things that you're doing. Really not more than 2 or 3, because unless there's a requirement, like some places you can have up to 5. Some places you can have as many as 7, but generally, 1 or 2 well-placed that speak to something very specific you've done, not just, oh yeah, I know Terry because I see him at MEIEA, right? It has to be something that is very substantial in terms of how it will persuade the reviewers to rate your application.
Great. I want to thank Beverly and Terry and Bruce for their time this morning and their great advice and insight into this issue. It's something we talk about almost every year because it is important to our careers. So we are out of time, and I encourage those of you watching to stick around for Vibrate's workshop coming up in just a few minutes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Great to see you. Have a
Bye,
wonderful
everyone.
conference. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.